Hello to all of you and warm welcome to People and Purpose, the podcast that shares insights beyond borders and explores how purpose-led, human-centered leadership shapes better businesses, better communities, and a better world. Today's guest is Michael Johansson, an optimistic futurist, transformation leader, and the founder of Change Pilots, a company helping organizations navigate future-oriented challenges through a systemic thinking, strategic foresight, and human connection. Michael sees himself as a pilot, guiding leaders and organizations through unfamiliar waters. His work is about helping leaders not only see what's next, but lead with clarity, optimism, and purpose. With over 25 years of experience and tens of successful transformations behind him, he combines big picture vision with the practical ability to, in his own words, get epic shit done. He has also been recently nominated as an optimistic futurist by the Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies, which I think is really exciting. So let's dive in. Michael, warm welcome.
Thank you so much, Tarja. It's so much, really my pleasure to be here.
Let's start with your worldview and your own story. So, Michael, what does being an optimistic futurist mean in today's world?
Well, from my point of view, and choosing that sort of like halfway through provocative title, is that I think it lacks hope in this world. And if I can be sort of like a contributor or an initiator for people's hope, that's sort of what I hope to bring to the table. And that's why I chose the title Futuristic and Optimism in Combine, that looking onwards to have that hope and to have the optimistic approach to going onwards. That's sort of like my worldview.
So I guess that's also the approach you're using as you're describing yourself as a pilot. Can you a little bit unpack that metaphor for us, and how does it tie into your role with Change Pilots?
Well, the thing is, when I founded the company, I thought of what could it be beyond my own personal name, and I thought that the analogy with a pilot being sort of like knowing the local harbor and guiding the big ships through that unfamiliar territory for them, but for me, sort of like my home turf. And then the combination of change and pilot, sort of like guiding people through changes, because most people are, specifically managers in large corporation, are sort of really unfamiliar with how to navigate through a transformation. I've been doing that for sort of like half of my lifetime. So that's sort of like my home turf. And that's why I chose the name Change Pilot, to guide people and organizations through unfamiliar territory for them and leading them into safe harbors.
You mentioned you've been doing this already for a very long time, but what really inspired you to found Change Pilots? Were there some gaps you were aiming to fill?
Well, I came out of a history of working with, in the late 90s, in a couple of these sort of like hyped internet consultancy firms. And what I lacked there was the true sort of like interest in really helping people. They were more concerned about sort of like implying technology into organizations. And my big interest was helping people navigate. And that's sort of like I left them and started this because I notioned that this was more true to me than to anything else. And if I should be able to bring something into this world, I need to be true to myself. That's why I founded Change Pilots.
And obviously it has been very successful since you've been doing this for already with many transformations, many companies, and many years. How has the optimism evolved for you over the years? Maybe now, especially when we are really navigating this uncertainty that is happening in the world.
Well, the involvement from sort of like the optimistic perspective has been that it's more crucial. And I think that optimistic approach has proven to be not only my guiding star and my way of doing things, but sort of more and more importantly, to give people hope. and to give something to strive towards, to have a pull from the future, you need to have sort of like not a naive, but still an optimistic view about what kind of future do we want to be part of shaping, and what kind of future do I want to take part in specifically if I lead a big company. If I don't have that purposeful or meaningful optimistic view, I don't get a pull from the future. I sort of more like oppose the future and trying to prolong what's in my history or in our company's history. And I think the more uncertain the world becomes, the more I think that optimistic view is necessary to sort of like motivate yourself if you're a leader, and specifically motivate others to take part in a history, in a future that is yet to be unrevealed.
Yeah, let's dive a bit deeper into these organizations and how do you really drive that successful transformation a bit later. First, I also want to now ask about this optimistic futurist in the Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies, which I think, as said, is really exciting. Can you share a bit what do you do in this role and what is this institute really
Well,
focusing on?
in short, the Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies is a non-profit, totally independent think tank who works with foresight and scenario plannings. So what we do is we help institutions and private corporations as well to imagine a future, to work with it and see what's the implications for our company, and then help them shape that. So it's sort of like the forerunner for strategy and for strategic discussions inside corporations to help them do that. That's what we do. And my role in that is that of the futurist to work in projects inside companies, both companies and institutions, and help them sort of like sort out the terms and practically guide them. Sort of like what I do in my company. I sort of like work with that as a pilot, guiding them through transformations.
Let's now dig into the transformation, and you said practically guide them. Can you give us some practical examples? How do you do the guiding? For example, with the organizations that really are ready for transformation.
Well, to start off, I have yet to find a company that is ready for transformation.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, because all of the companies that I've been called into, they sort of we have this problem. We don't really know what it is or how it's going to inflict us, but it really bothers us. Can you help us sort of like unpack that? And nobody's really sort of like willing, but at least some of them are willing to see that the future might look different and we need to change, but very, very few wants to change. And that insight is sort of like the starting point for my work often is giving them sort of like a self-esteem and give them some practical examples and sort of take them not on this big leap, but sort of like, okay, this is 100-meter race. We need to take 1 meter at a time. So it's small, small, small steps and building a confidence that we can change. And once you do that, you can also make leaders in a management team or a board of directors team, make them see, okay, now we worked with this for 6 months and look how far we have come. So by doing that in practice, not by saying we're going from this to this, but we're taking this little step first, and then we're going to add this step. So that's sort of like my systemic approach to that is not to implicitly say we're going to jump really high, but we're going to take small steps and we're going to do that in practice.
So your take on systemic thinking that you just mentioned, it's more about taking these small steps that actually then helps to take the bigger leap and understanding where we are actually heading as an organization.
Yeah, and it starts off with that sort of like notion that the future is supposedly going to look very different from our history. And just starting that sort of like imagining a future that is different, working with it constantly, and then starting to shape it. And that's sort of when it gets closer to the body and closer to the present is when you start shaping it. Because then you see, we did take a couple of steps. It worked. And then you get sort of like a higher self-esteem, and then you can do a bigger jump onwards.
I like the way you're talking about higher self-esteem, but can you also elaborate on the needed leadership skills or mindsets, or because I'm sure that not every leader is really capable of making a major transformation and thinking differently and really opening up for sort of different futures and letting go of the past.
No, of course not. And sort of like the predominantly hold vision for managers is that we shall protect what we have, and we shall build on our legacy going onwards, sort of like more like forecasting than foresighting. And in that is sort of like a mental shift that's saying, okay, if we want to sort of like anticipate a future and try to work with that, we need to sort of not let go of our forecast, but see that there's an alternative future that might need things that we really can't forecast, that we need to think differently about. So that's sort of like also my sort of like first step in working with leaders when I get to know them, is to help them see that future, that it might be different. And that's sort of like the first step in that systemic thinking, because nobody's really willing or prepared to do a transformation if you sort of in practice could get it sort of like under your shirt. not in theory, just in thinking, but sort of get it into your heart and into your chest. And that's sort of like the first step going onwards. And that's also to see the leaders that I've worked with, at least, the common thread in that is that once they gain that sort of like feeling or notion inside the shirt, they can do almost anything. But if they don't, they are not going to do a transformation full-hearted. They will just do that sort of like a show off in best cases, or as an scapegoat to saying, no, we're not going to do that because of 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Yeah. How do you work with leaders that have quite closed mindset and they really are not ready to change and transform, as opposed to leaders that really have the growth mindset and they are by default still ready to think differently and ready to take the steps towards unknown waters? How do you get those leaders that are not easily with you to follow?
Two things. There's a dividing call, I think, in this. When I sort of like accept a project to work with a leader, I sort of spend the first 1 or 2 months of that sort of like a tryout session, sort of like a pre-season training camp with that individual before working with the team. And if me and that leader can connect, we can do something that really inflicts on the organization. If we don't connect, meaning that we have various ambitions or we don't connect, I don't accept the project. So that's sort of like the pre-season training. You need to qualify. I need to be qualified to help that person, that individual, and that individual needs to connect with me on that one. Otherwise, it won't work. And I can't guide that person into a transformation. I can't force them. And I think that that's also sort of like my definition of the difference between management and leadership. Because management is something that you can manage things, you can manage tasks, but you can only lead people. And if you want people to contribute into imagining and working with and shaping something new into the future, you need to lead them. They need to want to follow. And if they don't want that, you won't get any change done.
Yeah, super important. And also how I like to view or talk about leadership is that everything starts by leading yourself, then leading your people, leading your team, and then of course leading the business and leading the transformation. I think that also gives a good holistic view what leadership in its full extension is all about.
Yeah, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned there, leading yourself could sound really prolific or philosophical, but it's also very practical. And if you can't sort of like articulate your own vision or your own goal or settings or view of the future, how can you get anybody else to want to follow? You can
Mm.
force them, say, I have authority over you. I point the way and you will follow. That's not leadership.
That's not leadership.
No, that's
Definitely in
management.
today's world.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it could be called management because you can manage. I have authority. But leadership requires free will. I want to follow.
And
And I
that's a
think that
really
could also be one of the big differences in leadership or management in the sort of like the older days when things were sort of like more predictable. In uncertainty, you really need leadership to be able to say, okay, if I don't want to follow you, I do something else. Fine, fine.
yeah, yeah. Hey, Michael, what gives you a strong sense of purpose in your work today, and how has that evolved over the years?
Well, coming from the optimistic sort of worldview, I tend to connect with people who I can see that also have that notion and want to really find the opportunities more than finding the threats and building on that. So it gives me a whole lot of purpose, not connect with like-minded, but to
Mm,
connect with people and I can see they have an aspiration. I
mm,
can help them find that aspiration going onwards. And that really motivates me to go to work every day and to work with that human, is to see if can I assist, guide as a pilot to help them find their purpose and their leadership skills and their future. Then I'm
mm,
happy. And that motivates me tons and
mm.
tons of times. And I
Yeah,
think that has also evolved over time because in the beginning of my career, it was all very much about me, not about the people I helped. But that has changed radically over these 25 years I've been working with this. So I've sort of like taken 2 or 3 steps back and instead sort of like helping and coaching instead of going before and pulling people.
yeah. So it's more given than getting at this
Exactly.
point of career.
But the interesting part about this is my notion of what I receive back is much more greater now than it was before.
Yeah,
And that's
yeah.
sort of like, at least for me, that sort of like proves the point in leading. I can
Mm,
I can help people find their purpose and their style and their attributions in their leadership, not mine.
yeah,
That's a big difference.
yeah. That's a big difference. And I also very much say that its leadership is not about me, it's about the people that I'm helping or working with
Mm.
or supporting in different ways. Mm. We have talked with you about this human connection, and you also mentioned that you believe that the importance of human connection is rising,
Mm.
uh, especially in transformation and future strategy. Why do you think that is?
Well, basically, I think it's very sort of like a humanism part in this, that the more uncertain the present and the future looks, the greater our needs is to feel safe. And we feel safe, it's always been like that, around other people, specifically other people we feel a connection with. So
Mm.
being part of a tribe or a company or whatever it might, a family or whatever it might be, makes you feel safe. And specifically, if you can have a worldview about the present and the future that is mutual, that you can connect to, you tend to feel more safe. And I think the more uncertain the world is, or at least it's viewed more uncertain, uh,
Mm.
the bigger the need for feeling safe is.
Mm. So also the importance on being part of a community, as you more or less already said, is really rising.
Mm. It is because we tend to feel more safe around people we trust. And if
Mm.
we're in an environment where we feel seen and heard and being part of, and be in that, if it's at work or at home, in your family, in your community, or whatever it is, you tend to have a notion that you have a better life. And I think the more uncertain that looks, the need to feel connected inside a tribe or inside a community is rising, because it makes you feel safe and it makes you have a more pleasant view about what's lies ahead of you.
Mm. Mm. You help leaders become more future ready, and I think what we already discussed is connected with this. But what does that actually require? I mean, beyond the sort of buzzwords.
Mm. Um, in short, and I think that a more proper term in that would be future prepared, not
Mm.
future ready.
Yeah.
Because we see so many variations about the future, and that's also interesting. The Copenhagen Institute for Futures Studies, it's called. So we see multiple futures ahead of us, and we need to
Oh.
prepare for that. So the basic question for that is, what if? If we can
Mm.
imagine telling us ourselves the question, and our companies, what if? Then we don't need to be ready for it, but we need to be prepared.
Yeah.
And if we are prepared, we're more likely to be able to handle situations, or more positively, we can shape a future that is better for us. But
Mm.
if we say that we need to be safe, or being able to be, some companies say we're future proof. And I
Mm.
think that's really hard to be. So my notion about this, can we be future prepared for multiple futures? Then we have a greater chance of avoiding problems, but also to shape a future that we really want to see.
Yeah. Yeah. I really like that, being prepared, because, as you said, ready. How can you be ready for something that you really don't know what's what's gonna come in the future?
Mm.
Hmm. Hey, how do you see optimism driving collective impact, both within organizations and broadly in a society and in a community?
Going back to the feeling safe part, the more
Mhm.
uncertain times we're heading into, and more people are feeling both disconnected from a company, or from a community, or from families, or whatever that is. Uh, and more people are having a pessimistic, or at least more and more uncertain view about their own future, and about the future for the planet as a whole. And I think if more people could have a sort of like a futures literacy view, understanding what kind of future lies ahead, and what can I do to inflict on that? How could I be part of shaping that? The greater the feeling and notion of connection and safety it will be. And I think that the more uncertain times we move into, the greater the that need will be. So
Mm.
if an optimistic future lies ahead of us, we're more likely to take part in it, and we're more likely to inflict on others as well, implicitly doing leadership lessons inside our communities, if we have a vision about that future, because it's going to pull us instead of
Mm.
oppose us.
Mm. Hey, if I'm a listener that has a very pessimistic view on the future, what could be a very concrete, you know, guidance or your tip that I should work with so that it changes to be more optimistic?
Um, Two things. One, internal.
Mm.
It's to see, okay, in a future, if I have a negative or a pessimistic view about the future,
Mm.
try to write down, what does that consist of? Why do I have that approach? And then try to seek out the other path. Okay, if this is not valid, what could be valid? And that's sort of one of the practices. I do a workshop
Mm.
specifically about this, with leaders who are sort of like trapped in their history, specifically companies who have a really successful history, because then they're
Mm.
trapped of sort of like predominantly predicting that future and extending it. So they're really not open for alternatives. and then they tend to see anything that threatens the things that we used to be winners about. It's a threat, and we will oppose that. So I tried to do a workshop with them, seeing, okay, the optimistic alternative, if that is not valid, what could be really valid for our company going onwards? So that's sort of like listing the things that we see threatening us, trying to find the other way. What could be the positive impact if that future occurs? How could we change or evolve? Because I think it's more like evolvement than changing in that. I think transformation is also a word that is really sort of like underpins something that is really hard and struggling and takes a lot of time. But if you could see it as a natural evolvement, that's much easier to be a part of. So if you're struggling with inside a transformation or with a pessimistic view about the future, try to see what could the alternative way be, and find guidance inside communities that are sort of like focusing on these issues. Because nowadays it's really easy to find companions around the globe in various contexts if you have a question or need some help. I do that all the time. I reach out to people and say, hey, I struggle with this. Anybody got a guess, or anybody can help? And there's always 20 people saying, hey, I did this. You could try that one. But reach out.
Reach out, connect with people. Yes, I really concrete guidance to the listeners that might be more towards being pessimistic. I'm not. I'm talking about maybe not turning problems into solutions. So being very solution focused. I think it's more or less the same approach and thinking that you just also shared. Hey, Michael, in your view, what do we need more of in leadership, in business, in society, if we are truly navigating towards a better future? You have been mentioning already quite a few practical tips and ways of doing it, but anything that you would add? What do we need more of that we will definitely head as a society, business, leadership towards a better future?
I think we need more leadership, to be really concrete. Leadership in many forms, but leadership as such is really something that I think will be increasingly important. We need political leadership that could sort of like point a societal view about that. We need leaders inside organization, not just managers, but we need really truly leaders. And we need leaders in the civil society as well, sort of like in practice in our local communities, to guide us onwards. And leadership, I think, is a practice that some has the skill or the ability sort of like naturally to do that, but anybody could be a leader. I've seen tons of people going through sort of like learning how to be a leader. That's a skill. You can learn that skill, because I think the true future lies in the hands of people who are willing to commit to leadership, because that's a choice. Leadership is a choice. I commit to be a leader. I want you to follow me because I have this idea or whatever it might be that will be sort of like important. It's important for me personally to do this, and then I want you to follow. But you won't follow because fellowship is voluntary. So I need to be really concrete and clear about the vision or the worldview that I have that I want you to follow. So I think leadership in its sort of like key point, leading the ship, that means sort of like embracing that because it comes with a choice. I choose to do this because it's important to me. Then I want you to follow. So the most, I think, important ways of going into a future, specifically a future with an optimistic sort of like pre-roll to it, is leadership.
And I really like how you say that anybody can learn leadership, and leadership is a choice, and it's a skill. Yeah. Hey, I think we are approaching to the end of this very insightful episode, and I'd love to do this quick fire with you. So short questions and ideally fairly short answers. Is there one book that has shaped your thinking the most?
Um, actually, it's two books. One book is Finite and Infinite Games by James P. Carsey, sort of like released mid-60s or something, about the notion that life contains of two various choices of game theory, and specifically it's either finite games that you play them to win, or infinite games where you take part in something to be able to continue to play. And that sort of like really inflicted on my mindset, that shifting from doing something that's better than somebody else into being able to continue to play and take part. And that's more like life. Life is an infinite game, more or less. And that really sort of like shaped my
Hmm.
worldview. And the other book is Tribes by Seth Godin, released sort of like 2005 or something like that, about how we gather. And that's sort of like the quintessential leadership book. How do you gather a tribe? You need to have something that really is purposeful for yourself. You need to commit to the leadership practice, and you need to have that desire to change. And that sort of like really shaped my leadership view and the way I do coaching and how I work with leaders to anticipate and to work with and shape their future.
Very interesting. What's one practice that keeps your optimism alive?
Um, it's really stupid, but simple. And to keep my optimism alive, specifically when things get messy, really,
Mm.
is to do something that is really slow and practical. And I love cooking. So if you're part of doing cooking or gardening or going in the forest with your dog, like I do, uh, it's somebody else that sort of like creates the pace. You can't
Mm.
really hurry when you're cooking. You need to just, okay, this will take 2 hours. Okay, I'll sit and stir for 2 hours. That sort of really grounds me, and it sort of like also guides me when
Mm.
when my head is really messy and when the world around me is messy. I sort of like tend to do something that is really practical and slow.
And slow.
Yeah.
Very good. Thinking about the future, there's a lot of myths that people might have about the future. What can you name the biggest myth that people might have about the future?
The biggest myth is that you can't predict it. You can't. You can't
Mm.
predict the future. You can anticipate. You can have an imagination. You could sort of like work with that imagination, trying to find out things and prepare yourself, but you can never predict it.
Mm.
That's sort of like the groundwork or the ground notion to be able to adapt, is that you face that. You can say,
Mm.
okay, what if? What if
Mm.
this happens? Then you can sort of like anticipate, but you
Yeah,
can't predict it.
yeah, yeah. Do you have a single quote that you live by, something that also guides you, somehow summarizes your core thinking?
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure if it's really a quote, but there's something like the difference between theory and practice is greater in practice than in theory. And meaning that me being a really practitioner guy, and sort of like really like to get my hands dirty into doing that, it's really that when you practice things, that's really when change occurs. So the difference between theory and practice is that in theory you can sort of like think out loud and you can write down, this is our plan. But when you get your hands dirty into practice, that tends to differ very much
Mm.
often from what you can anticipate or predict in theory. So the difference between practice and theory is bigger in practice than in theory.
Very interesting.
Mm.
Yeah. Hey, if you could leave one message with our listeners, especially those leading through heavy transformation and complexity, what would it be?
Uh, Trust yourself. Uh, Trust your gut, or trust your own notions that this is right, this is wrong. find your ethos, or maybe not just your philosophy, but trust your own notion. If you ought to lead somebody, you need to have that trust inside yourself. Of course, you need to listen and see what other people are doing, or taking other people's emotions in a management team or so. But you need to trust yourself, and trust that I do this. This is sort of like my conviction about stuff. I see this future. I see this need for a transformation. So trust yourself.
Trust yourself. I think that's a really, really good guidance, key message for the listeners. Hey, Michael, thank you so much for bringing, I think, hope, optimism, and also humanity to the conversation about the future. I think you have reminded us that optimism is a choice. We all can be prepared, but it's a choice to believe in better and to work for it with purpose. Michael, thank you so much for joining, and thank you everybody for listening in. Until next time, thank you.
Thank you.